Welcome, Arizona Cardinals fans, to the Revenge of the Birds wrap-up show. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me, my co-host, Tyler Nickel. And we come after a second loss already on the season. I thought this would be like week 8 or 9 before we were talking about the second loss of the season. And yet, here we are, week 3. The Cardinals sit at a bad 1-2. And I've labeled this the worst performance of the Bruce Arians era. What were your just overarching thoughts of the loss, Tyler?
Well, it's hard to disagree with your statement that it's the worst loss of the Arians era. I mean, maybe you could point back to the Pittsburgh Steelers game last season. That was pretty bad. But this game, going into the game, position group and said the Cardinals have the better personnel for that position group. But yet here we are, 17-0, and you're thinking, I don't think they're going to come out with this game. I mean, you were hoping for one of those Browns comeback type performances like they had last season, but it just never, materialized.
And it was one of those things that what's dangerous about the NFL and what's hard about the NFL is that, we all know quarterback play makes a huge difference, but you look at that Bills team, and no matter what you and I, outsiders, everybody else thinks of Rex Ryan, the report is always that his players love him and that his players fight for him. And so his players knew that this game meant something, and not just like in a win column sort of way, but this game could potentially save his job for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, and kind of elongate and maybe let things get better, because Buffalo is hurting. They're missing their best offensive lineman. They're missing their best wide receiver. They're missing maybe the best defensive tackle in the NFL in Marcel Darius. And so they're going to get all these players back in the next couple weeks, and they somehow have survived to get to 1-2. On the flip side, the Cardinals, they're missing Evan Mathis. That was a big loss, but you look at it and you go, okay, no Marcel Darius, should be okay. Robert Kimdiche continues to be on the inactive list. I don't know if that's a headbutting type thing with Bruce Arians or if it's a legit concern with his ankle. But okay, they have a pretty good, at least we thought, a pretty good and deep defensive line. And now we're sitting here, the offensive line looked overmatched, and the defensive line looked overmatched. I mean, over 200 yards rushing for the Bills, and I get that Tyrod Taylor is a mobile quarterback, but LaShawn McCoy had over 100 yards rushing, and it wasn't even really a tough 100 yards for him, I would say.
Yeah, and granted, some of it came on big plays, which, I mean, if you take those away, they're still having a good rushing game, though. That's the problem. I mean, we heard from Bruce Arians all week long that he kept comparing Tyrod Taylor to kind of a poor man's Russell Wilson. So if you knew that, then why did you allow him to use his legs to beat you? And then he also used his arms. I mean, he used everything to beat us, but you didn't take away one of the key focal points of his game that makes him successful, and you let them just trounce on you.
Yeah, and you look at it, and I talked about it a little bit. I'm going to write about it probably for Wednesday. The defense, they weren't good, especially against the run. But you look at the first 3 series, the Bills went 3 and out, punted. The Cardinals had the ball at their own 40-yard line, or sorry, at the Bills' 40-yard line. So they had 40 yards to go for a touchdown, 10 yards maybe for a field goal, and they end up punting. Then the next time they get the ball back again, 3 and out for the Bills. The Cardinals go 3 and out again. The next drive, they hold them to a field goal. And yet it took an entire quarter and then a couple minutes before the Cardinals got a first down. 5 series of 3 and outs. What is wrong with this Arizona Cardinals offense?
I mean, if I could put my finger on it, I'd probably be an assistant coach or something. But I feel like there's too much people trying to do either too much or people not having their heads in the game. So you look at Michael Floyd, He was horrendous yesterday. Absolutely terrible. And granted, now we see he's in the concussion protocol, so who knows how much of his head was scrambled or what was going on with that. But he was dropping passes. He's catching with his body. I mean, it was just a really bad game. And I think it was just more of that from other guys. Granted, there were routes that were run really poorly, and it looked like Carson Palmer was throwing, to go somewhere in the middle of the field when there was supposed to be a receiver there. And then it really boils down to Palmer, too. We can't blame it all on offensive line and all on bad route running and all on not catching the ball. Yes, some of it is attributed to that, but some of it is attributed to Carson Palmer throwing a ball directly to Stephon Gilmore twice, directly to him for interceptions. And, I mean, bad routes can create some of that, but Palmer's got to start playing better, too.
You look at the offense, and Vince Murata tweeted this out. There hasn't been a lot of turnover. You and I have talked about it off the air. I've talked about it in articles. I think that's the biggest thing. Is like we get that the offensive line was going to have some work to do, and it's shown. They haven't been great in pass protection, but let's be completely honest. The offensive line last year wasn't great in pass protection either, and yet we saw Palmer a lot of times when he had bad games work himself into a good game. Except he hasn't had a good game since really that Philadelphia game. You can talk about that first Packers game. He was okay. But, the half against Seattle, the playoff game against Green Bay, obviously the playoff game against Carolina. And then you look at the New England game. Statistically, he looked good. But there were a lot of throws where he made them and receivers bailed him out. He hasn't looked as efficient, and the arm doesn't look as strong as it did, at the beginning of last year. I think, and I talked about this, if they're going to continue to throw these 50-50 balls, if they're going to continue to push the ball down the field, then that goes to the receivers having to understand that. And I feel like right now, the only receiver that gets that is Larry Fitzgerald. He's the only one that understands you have to fight back to the ball, especially if Palmer has lost a little bit in terms of arm strength.
Yeah, it definitely looks like he has. He's using his body to throw it. Like it doesn't look like he's just smoothly stepping into his throws and releasing for, those 50-yard throws or whatever you want to call them. He just looks like he has to put so much effort into him to push down the field, and it just doesn't. I don't know what's going on. If there's a health thing, if it's all a mental thing, I'm not sure. But so if they want to continue to run that offense and stay away from David Johnson running the ball for whatever reason, then they're going to need to figure out what's Palmer need to do to get back on track.
Offensively, it wasn't all bad, as you just said. David Johnson was, again, phenomenal. I thought John Brown came out and had a nice game. I think he had 6 or 7 catches for 70 yards. Obviously, Carson Palmer didn't throw a touchdown. Larry Fitzgerald continues to be the workhorse of the receiving core. Outside of that, though, I think offensively there left a lot to be desired. Let's go over to the defensive side of the ball. The secondary and the pass rush was probably their best game of the season. Again, the Bills aren't a great passing team. They were beat up along the offensive line, but that's what you want to see from the Cardinals against an opponent like that. Held Tyrod Taylor to 14 of 25, only 119 yards passing. I mean, that is beyond pedestrian.
Right.
1 interception, 4 sacks on the game. It was a very strong performance in the secondary and with the pass rush. Now, it was the other side of the ball, stopping the run, and it's not been something we've seen this year, but now all of a sudden, in this game, 32 carries for 208 yards, 6.5 yards per carry average is absurd. I mean, it's ridiculous. 3 touchdowns, obviously. Do we attribute this to the fact that they kept 9 defensive linemen,
right,
only 5 dressed, And I don't think they're getting the production out of Josh Morrow and Ed Stinson that people had expected. So all of a sudden, your only options along the defensive line are really Calais Campbell, who played well, Corey Peters, who was hit and miss, and Rodney Gunter, who's kind of been the invisible man the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, the defensive line has really underwhelmed. I think Calais Campbell's been the only consistent guy along there, and I also think we can attribute some of it to Buchanan hasn't played particularly well these first 3 games. I thought Kevin Minter on the flip side had a great game yesterday. I thought he was aggressive towards the ball. He looked more speedy and shifty than usual. Usually he's a little bit slower in coverage and whatnot, but I think he had a really good game. I think they miss Frosty Rucker. I think he's a guy that adds a lot to that defensive line. And like you said, Gunter's been invisible. I haven't seen anything from Gunter that's like, oh, wow, this guy could definitely replace Calais Campbell if he walks next year in free agency.
Anything else you want to talk about? I mean, we can talk about the special teams, but that was just a giant cluster, and I think we're going to see a new long snapper and punter probably this week.
Well, yeah, I think you will too. I think in the secondary, like you were talking about a little bit before, I thought Cooper had a good game again. I thought he played well. And I think he's kind of, I mean, despite Brandon Williams being listed as a CB2 on the depth chart going into the game, Cooper got the lion's share of the snaps at that position. So I think he's kind of solidified himself for now at that position across from Patrick Peterson. Tony Jefferson continues to impress. He leads the team in tackles. He's been the most consistent player on the defense by far, in my opinion. So if guys can just step up and kind of match his level of intensity that he seems to bring, maybe this team can start turning things around. Still looking for Tyrann Mathieu, though.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that Arians, in his press conference today, said he liked Mathieu trying to pick up that ball and run. Said it showed that he's feeling better and more of the quote unquote honey badger attitude, trying to make a big play. I agree with that thought process, but I also think as a football player, you have to understand time and situation. And just as a situational football play, it wasn't the time to try to make that big play. It was a time to get the ball back and get your offense back on the field, even though they hadn't really done anything offensively.
Yeah, exactly. How much of that is a distrust in the offense to do anything with the ball? So maybe he thought, you know what, like I mentioned earlier, some of these guys are overperforming and they're doing things outside of their natural abilities to try and make plays. So what if that was a reaction to that and that he thought, I need to make a play. I need to spark something for my team. I'm the emotional leader. I'm the guy that carries this defense most of the time. I'm going to do something and score a touchdown and try and get us back in the game. I think a lot of it probably boils down to that, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's the fair point. Like I said, I'm not upset with the try as much as like it just was a bad situational time for that just because they needed the ball back so badly. But I do understand that argument as well. Like your offense has sucked. Let's, try to make a huge play and, really shift the momentum back into the Cardinals' favor. Outside of that, St. Louis coming into town this week. Or Los Angeles, my bad. I'm going to do that all year long. Los Angeles coming into town this week. They were supposed to be bad, and now they're leading the division. So,
still end 7-9 though, so don't worry about it.
Right, but I mean, heck, that might win the division this year. Who knows? You look at it. Obviously, we'll talk about it later on, but you have their defensive line is going to create havoc. It always does. The question now is, and I think it's legitimate, can the Cardinals stop the running game attack of St. Louis or Los Angeles? Can they stop Todd Gurley, who seems to have gotten back on track?
Yeah, I definitely think that is going to be the case, and they're going to put, I think, more focal point on that. You don't have a running quarterback this game, and I think that you need to stop the run more than you did with the Bills, where Tyrod Taylor can beat you sometimes with a deep ball, even though they made the passing game, like you said, look really bad. I think they're going to really stack the box. So we'll see what they end up doing, though.
You don't want to say Game 4 is a must win, but this is pretty much a must win for the
It
Cardinals. They don't
is.
want to fall to 1-3, right?
No,
Two
yeah,
games behind.
it's a must win.
So, all right. Well, that's it from us. We'll be back next week as we're talking about a Cardinals victory, hopefully. So, thanks for listening as always, and have a great night.